Howdy, folks, and welcome to the Valley. These rolling hills, these whispering rivers, they hold a story of courage, of tragedy, of a man named Thomas Jonathan Jackson, a man history would come to know as Stonewall. Join me now as we journey back to the tumultuous days of the 19th century. Walk with me through the life of a man who became a legend. Our story begins not on a battlefield shrouded in smoke, but in the quiet town of Clarksburg, Virginia, a place where life moved at the pace of a horse-drawn carriage, where the seasons turned slow and sure. Here, amidst the rolling hills of what would become West Virginia, a legend was born. It was a cold January day, the 21st to be precise, in the year of our Lord 1824, when a son was born to Jonathan and Julia Jackson. They named him Thomas, little knowing the mark he would leave on history. This is his story. Life in the early 1800s moved at a different pace. The air was filled with the clatter of horse hooves on cobblestones, the scent of wood smoke and freshly baked bread. It was a time of expansion, of exploration, of a young nation finding its footing. But it was also a time of deep division. The issue of slavery cast a long shadow over the land, driving a wedge between North and South. The winds of change were blowing, carrying with them the threat of a storm that would tear the nation asunder. It was into this world, marked by both hope and uncertainty, that Thomas Jackson was born. His family, though not wealthy, held a respected place in their community. His father, a lawyer and businessman, instilled in him a strong sense of duty and a deep faith in God. Little did they know that their young son, quiet and unassuming, would one day be called upon to play a pivotal role in the unfolding drama of American history. The world into which Thomas Jackson was born was far removed from the grand halls of power and the roar of cannon fire. His was a childhood spent in the rural backcountry, surrounded by the rugged beauty of the Allegheny Mountains. Life was hard, resources scarce. Tragedy struck early when his father and baby sister died of typhoid fever within days of each other. Thomas was just 3 years old. The loss left a void in his life, a shadow that would follow him for years to come. His mother Julia was left to raise her 3 young children alone. A woman of remarkable strength and resilience, she instilled in her children the values of hard work, perseverance, and faith. These values would serve Thomas well in the years to come. Even as a child, Thomas possessed a quiet intensity, a seriousness beyond his years. He was a solitary boy, more comfortable in the company of books than people. He devoured every volume he could get his hands on, his mind soaking up knowledge like a sponge. Life dealt Thomas another cruel blow when he was just 7 years old. His beloved mother Julia succumbed to tuberculosis, leaving him orphaned. He and his siblings were separated, sent to live with various relatives. For young Thomas, life became a series of difficult adjustments. He found himself shuffled from one relative to another, never quite feeling at home. He worked long hours at a grist mill owned by an uncle, enduring harsh treatment and grueling labor. Through it all, Thomas clung to his faith and his determination to make something of himself. He understood the value of hard work, the importance of perseverance. He continued to educate himself whenever possible, borrowing books and teaching himself whenever he could. He may have been an orphan, cast adrift in the world, but Thomas Jackson refused to be defined by his circumstances. He carried within him a spark of something extraordinary, a spirit waiting to be kindled. For a young man of Thomas Jackson's limited means and uncertain prospects, a formal education seemed like an impossible dream. Yet fate, as it often does, had other plans. In 1842, at the age of 18, Jackson received an appointment to the prestigious United States Military Academy at West Point. It was a world away from the rural backwoods of his youth. Life at West Point was rigorous, demanding, a constant test of physical and mental endurance. The Academy's strict code of conduct, its emphasis on discipline and honor, resonated deeply with Jackson's own personal values. Jackson, initially self-conscious and uncertain, threw himself into his studies with characteristic zeal. He excelled in mathematics and engineering, his sharp mind quickly grasping complex concepts. He proved to be a quick study on the parade ground as well, displaying a natural aptitude for military tactics. While he respected his classmates and formed a few close friendships, Jackson remained a solitary figure. He preferred the company of books to the boisterous camaraderie of the barracks. He was driven by a deep-seated desire to succeed, to prove himself worthy of the opportunity he had been given. Jackson's time at West Point coincided with a period of growing tension between the United States and Mexico. In 1846, war erupted, and Jackson, eager to prove himself in battle, received his commission as a brevet second lieutenant in the United States Army. The Mexican-American War would prove to be a crucible in which Jackson's military skills were forged. He served with distinction, fighting in several key battles, including the Siege of Veracruz and the Battle of Chapultepec. He quickly earned a reputation for his bravery, his coolness under fire, and his keen tactical mind. It was during the Battle of Contreras that Jackson's actions earned him a promotion to brevet captain. Under a hail of enemy fire, he rallied his men and led a daring charge that helped secure a crucial victory. His courage and leadership under fire did not go unnoticed. The Mexican-American War, though controversial, provided Jackson with invaluable experience. He learned the art of command, the importance of discipline and morale, and the unpredictable nature of battle. He returned from the war a decorated veteran, his reputation as a capable and courageous officer firmly established. Following the Mexican-American War, Jackson resigned his commission and accepted a position as a professor of artillery tactics at the Virginia Military Institute in Lexington, Virginia. The transition from battle-hardened soldier to academic was not an easy one. Jackson, accustomed to the strict discipline of military life, struggled to adapt to the more relaxed atmosphere of academia. His rigid teaching style and strict adherence to rules and regulations earned him the nickname Tom Fool Jackson from his students. Despite the initial challenges, Jackson remained committed to his duties at VMI. He saw teaching as an extension of his service to his beloved Virginia, a way to shape the minds of the young men who would one day lead the state. His personal life during this period was marked by both joy and sorrow. He married Eleanor Junkin, the daughter of a college president, but their happiness was short-lived. Eleanor died in childbirth the following year. Devastated by the loss, Jackson found solace in his faith and his work. He would later remarry, finding happiness with Mary Anna Morrison, with whom he would have a daughter. The year is 1860. A shadow falls across the land, a shadow of discord and division. The issue of slavery, that festering wound on the soul of America, has brought the nation to the brink of war. In the North, the election of Abraham Lincoln, a man who vowed to limit the spread of slavery, ignites a firestorm of controversy. The Southern states, fearing for their way of life, their very identity, see secession as their only option. One by one, they lower the stars and stripes, raising new banners of independence. South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas. A new nation is born, the Confederate States of America, founded on the principle of states' rights and the preservation of slavery. The die is cast. A nation once united now stands divided, poised on the precipice of a conflict that will test the very fabric of its being. For Thomas Jackson, the news of secession weighs heavily on his heart. A Virginian by birth, a West Point graduate, a veteran of the Mexican-American War, he is a man of divided loyalties. Can he in good conscience take up arms against the nation he has sworn to defend? He seeks solace in prayer, wrestling with his conscience. The decision he knows will have profound consequences, not only for himself but for the future of the nation. His heart aches for peace, yet he senses the inevitability of war. When Virginia secedes, Jackson's mind is made up. He cannot in good conscience stand idly by while his home state prepares for war. He resigns his commission in the United States Army and accepts a commission as a colonel in the Confederate Army. It is a decision he does not take lightly. He knows the horrors of war firsthand. He understands the sacrifices that will be demanded of him, of his men, of the nation. Yet, he believes he has no other choice. He must answer the call of duty even if it means taking up arms against his former comrades. The war that engulfs the nation divides not only states, but families, friends, and neighbors. In Virginia, the western counties, with their ties to the Union, refused to secede, forming a new state, West Virginia. The eastern counties, where slavery is more deeply entrenched, remain loyal to the Confederacy. At the Virginia Military Institute, Jackson's former students flocked to enlist in the Confederate Army. They are eager to prove themselves in battle to defend their homes and families. Jackson, now a brigadier general, is given command of the 1st Brigade of the Army of the Shenandoah. He is a stern taskmaster, demanding discipline and obedience from his men. He drills them relentlessly, instilling in them the importance of precision and order on the battlefield. He believes that victory is achieved not through reckless charges, but through careful planning and strategic maneuvering. But Jackson is more than just a disciplinarian. He is also a man of deep faith, and he shares his beliefs openly with his men. He holds prayer meetings before battles, seeking divine guidance and protection. He believes that God is on their side, that their cause is just. In the spring of 1861, the war is still young, and both sides are jockeying for position. The Confederacy establishes an arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, a town of strategic importance located at the confluence of the Shenandoah and Potomac rivers. Colonel Robert E. Lee, a distinguished Virginian and former superintendent of West Point, is sent to assess the situation. He is impressed by Jackson's efficiency and military bearing. Lee recognizes in Jackson a kindred spirit, a man of unwavering conviction and military acumen. Under Jackson's command, the Confederacy quickly fortifies the town, transforming it into a formidable defensive position. He understands the importance of controlling the high ground and the vital rail lines that pass through the area. The Union Army, under the command of General Robert Patterson, advances on Harper's Ferry, determined to capture the vital arsenal. A tense standoff ensues, but Jackson, outnumbered and outgunned, refuses to yield. He will hold the town as long as possible, buying precious time for the Confederacy to gather its strength. As the summer of 1861 wears on, the focus of the war shifts to Manassas Junction, a vital railroad hub just south of Washington, D.C. Control of Manassas would give the Confederacy a strategic advantage, threatening the Union capital itself. Confederate forces, under the command of the charismatic General P.G.T. Beauregard, dig in around Manassas, preparing for the inevitable Union assault. Among Beauregard's commanders is Brigadier General Thomas Jackson, his brigade stationed on Henry Hill, a strategically important rise overlooking the battlefield. On July 21, 1861, the Union Army, under the command of General Irvin McDowell, attacks. The First Battle of Bull Run, as it comes to be known, is a chaotic and bloody affair. Both sides fight with tenacity, but the Union forces, believing they have the advantage, launch a series of poorly coordinated assaults. The tide of the battle begins to turn as Jackson's brigade, standing firm on Henry Hill, repels wave after wave of Union attacks. The fighting is fierce, hand to hand, but Jackson's men hold their ground, their resolve unbroken. As the Union forces press their attack, another Confederate brigade, commanded by General Barnard B., falters under the relentless onslaught. B., desperate to rally his men, points to Jackson's brigade, still holding firm on Henry Hill. "There stands Jackson like a stone wall," B. shouts, his voice ringing out over the din of battle. "Rally behind the Virginians." The name Stonewall sticks, instantly becoming a legend. Inspired by Jackson's unwavering courage, the Confederate lines hold. Reinforcements arrive and the tide of the battle turns. The Union assault, once so full of promise, crumbles. Panic sets in, and the Union troops, routed and demoralized, retreat back towards Washington. The First Battle of Bull Run is a Confederate victory, a much-needed boost to Southern morale. But the victory comes at a high price. Thousands lie dead and wounded on both sides. The war, once a distant rumble, has arrived in all its fury. In the spring of 1862, the Union Army launches a massive offensive, aiming to capture the Confederate capital at Richmond, Virginia. General George B. McClellan, the Union commander, plans a two-pronged attack, with one force advancing up the Virginia Peninsula and another striking from the Shenandoah Valley. Stonewall Jackson, now a major general and a hero of the Confederacy, is given command of a relatively small but highly mobile force in the Shenandoah Valley. His mission is to prevent Union forces from reinforcing McClellan's main army, tying down as many Union troops as possible. What follows is a brilliant campaign of maneuver and deception. Jackson's foot cavalry, as his men are known, marches at an astonishing pace, covering vast distances in a short amount of time. They strike quickly and decisively, appearing where they are least expected, disappearing before the enemy can react. Jackson's Valley campaign is a masterpiece of military strategy. He defeats 3 separate Union armies, larger than his own, in a series of swift and decisive engagements. His victories send shockwaves through the Union High Command, forcing McClellan to divert troops from his main army to deal with the Stonewall threat. Jackson's Valley campaign is a testament to his military genius and the tenacity of his troops. He has achieved the seemingly impossible, keeping a much larger Union force off balance, buying precious time for the Confederacy to prepare its defenses of Richmond. His name becomes synonymous with victory, his exploits inspiring awe and admiration throughout the South. He remains a deeply religious man, attributing his successes to divine providence. He cares for his men, sharing their hardships and inspiring them by his own example of courage and self-sacrifice. The bloodiest battles are yet to come, and Jackson, ever the faithful soldier, will be there, leading his men with unwavering courage. The Union Army of the Potomac, under General McClellan, inches closer to the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. Confederate forces, outnumbered but determined, prepared to defend their capital to the death. Among them is Stonewall Jackson, his Valley campaign a resounding success, but his men exhausted from their rapid marches and relentless fighting. General Robert E. Lee, newly appointed commander of the Army of Northern Virginia, recognizes the threat posed by McClellan's advance. He summons Jackson from the Shenandoah Valley, placing his trust in the general whose reputation for audacity and military brilliance has spread throughout the Confederacy. The 7 days battles, a series of brutal engagements fought in the swamps and forests outside Richmond, commence. Jackson's men, though weary, fight with their usual ferocity, but the Union Army, better equipped and supplied, proves a formidable foe. Throughout the 7 days, Jackson's name becomes a rallying cry for the Confederates, his presence on the battlefield, a source of both fear and inspiration. Union soldiers, having heard tales of his lightning strikes and relentless attacks, view him as an almost mythical figure. Despite some tactical setbacks, Jackson's aggressive actions contribute to the Confederate defense, slowing McClellan's advance and sapping the morale of his troops. Gaines's Mill, Savage's Station, Fraser's Farm, Malvern Hill. Each engagement leaves its mark on the landscape and the souls of the men who fight there. Exhausted Confederate soldiers tend to their wounded comrades. The cost of defending Richmond is high, but their spirits remain unbroken. The 7 days' battles, though tactically inconclusive, proved to be a strategic victory for the Confederacy. McClellan, his advance stalled, his army bloodied and demoralized, withdraws from the peninsula, abandoning his campaign to capture Richmond. A portrait of Jackson, his face etched with fatigue but his eyes still burning with determination, reflects the fierce fighting spirit of the Army of Northern Virginia. The Confederate capital is saved, but at a terrible cost. With McClellan's threat to Richmond contained, Lee turns his attention to a new objective: driving the Union Army out of Virginia altogether. He conceives a daring plan, relying on the element of surprise and the swift, decisive action that has become Stonewall Jackson's hallmark. Jackson, his men rested and resupplied after the grueling 7 days battles, is eager to take the offensive. Lee's plan calls for Jackson to lead his corps on a wide flanking march, circling around McClellan's army and striking his supply depot at Manassas Junction. Jackson's men, their spirits high, march with renewed purpose. They are the hammer to Lee's anvil, tasked with delivering a decisive blow against the unsuspecting enemy. The march is grueling, the summer heat oppressive, but Jackson's men, accustomed to hardship, drive themselves forward. They march with a sense of purpose, knowing that the fate of the Confederacy may rest on their shoulders. Jackson's audacious maneuver takes the Union Army completely by surprise. His men fall upon the unprepared defenders of Manassas Junction, capturing vast quantities of supplies and equipment, burning what they cannot carry. The raid on Manassas Junction sends shockwaves through the Union High Command. McClellan, caught off guard, frantically orders his forces to converge on Jackson's position, determined to crush the audacious Confederate general and his men. On August 28, 1862, the Second Battle of Manassas begins. Jackson's men, outnumbered but fighting with the fury of cornered wolves, hold off wave after wave of Union attacks. The summer of 1862 fades into a crisp autumn. Emboldened by their recent victories, Lee and his Army of Northern Virginia cross the Potomac River, carrying the war into the North. The Confederacy's hopes ride high, their sights set on a decisive victory that will force the Union to the negotiating table. For the Southern soldiers, crossing the Potomac is a symbolic act, a turning point in the war. No longer content to defend their own land, they are now the invaders, carrying the fight to the heart of the enemy's territory. Maryland, a border state with deep ties to both North and South, greets the Confederates with a mixture of apprehension and cautious welcome. Lee, ever the strategist, hopes to persuade Maryland to secede, a move that would deal a significant blow to Union morale and bolster Confederate hopes for foreign recognition. As the Confederate Army advances deeper into Maryland, a thick fog descends, shrouding the countryside in an eerie silence. The fog, a metaphor for the uncertainty of war, conceals both friend and foe, adding an element of confusion and danger to every move. Communication becomes difficult, orders are delayed, and scouts struggle to penetrate the veil of mist that hangs heavy over the landscape. In this atmosphere of uncertainty, a single misplaced order, a missed opportunity, could spell disaster. A copy of Lee's marching orders detailing the disposition of his forces falls into Union hands, a stroke of luck that will have far-reaching consequences for both sides. Lee, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, finds himself in a precarious position. His army, divided by the Potomac River, faces the prospect of being destroyed piecemeal by McClellan's larger force. Stonewall Jackson, his men exhausted from their capture of Harper's Ferry, rejoins Lee's main force near the small town of Sharpsburg, Maryland. Lee, recognizing the gravity of the situation, makes a daring decision. He will stand and fight, making a desperate stand against the advancing Union Army. On September 17, 1862, the Battle of Antietam begins. The fighting is fierce, the bloodiest single day in American history. Throughout the day, Jackson's men, fighting with their usual tenacity, hold the left flank of the Confederate line against overwhelming odds. Time and again, they repulse Union attacks, inflicting heavy casualties and buying precious time for their comrades. As the sun begins to set, a final, desperate Union assault threatens to break through the Confederate lines. Just when it seems all is lost, General A.P. Hill arrives from Harper's Ferry with fresh troops, striking the flank of the attacking Union forces and driving them back in disarray. The Battle of Antietam ends in a tactical draw. Neither side is able to claim a decisive victory, but the cost of the battle is staggering. Over 23,000 men lie dead or wounded, a grim testament to the human cost of the war. In the aftermath of Antietam, Stonewall Jackson's reputation as a brilliant and audacious commander reaches its zenith. He is the Confederacy's sword arm, a general whose name strikes fear into the hearts of his enemies and inspires confidence in his own men. But Jackson is more than just a military tactician. He is a man of deep religious conviction, attributing his successes to the will of God. He believes that God has chosen him to lead the Confederacy to victory, and he approaches his duties with a sense of divine purpose. He is a stern taskmaster, demanding discipline and obedience from his men. He drills them relentlessly, instilling in them the importance of precision, order, and unwavering courage under fire. Jackson's mind is always at work, analyzing past battles, studying maps, and planning future campaigns. The fall of 1862 brings a brief respite from the fighting. The armies, exhausted from the campaigning season, settle into winter quarters. For Stonewall Jackson, this is a time for reflection, for tending to his spiritual needs, and for spending precious time with his beloved wife, Mary Anna. Their daughter Julia, born in November of 1862, brings Jackson immeasurable happiness. He is a devoted husband and father, finding solace in the love of his family amidst the horrors of war. In letters to Mary Anna, he shares his hopes and fears, his unwavering faith in God, and his deep love for his family. These are rare moments of peace and tranquility in a life consumed by war. Spring of 1863 arrives, bringing with it the promise of renewed fighting. The Army of the Potomac, now under the command of General Joseph Hooker, has been reinforced and reorganized, eager to avenge its earlier defeats. Hooker, a confident and aggressive commander, plans a daring campaign to outmaneuver Lee and capture Richmond. He will send a portion of his army on a wide flanking march, threatening Lee's rear, while the main body of his force attacks the Confederates head-on. Lee, facing overwhelming odds, knows that he cannot hope to defend every inch of ground. He must take a calculated risk, a gamble that will rely on the swift action and tactical brilliance of his most trusted lieutenant, Stonewall Jackson. On May 2nd, 1863, Jackson's corps, consisting of some 28,000 men, sets out on its secret mission. They march through the dense undergrowth of the wilderness, a vast and tangled expanse of trees, thickets, and narrow winding trails. The wilderness, a place of eerie beauty and hidden dangers, muffles the sounds of battle, making it difficult to distinguish friend from foe. Confederate scouts, their movements concealed by the thick foliage, range ahead, searching for the enemy and relaying vital information back to Jackson. The element of surprise is crucial to the success of Lee's plan, and Jackson takes every precaution to ensure that his movements remain undetected. As the sun begins to set, Jackson's men reach their objective, the exposed right flank of Hooker's unsuspecting army. The Confederate attack, when it comes, is swift and devastating. Jackson's men, emerging from the cover of the wilderness, unleash a fury of musket fire and artillery, smashing into the unprepared Union lines. The Union, the Seventh Corps, caught completely by surprise, crumbles under the ferocity of the Confederate assault. Jackson, ever eager to press his advantage, rides ahead with a small party of officers to reconnoiter the enemy's position. He is determined to exploit the breakthrough, to roll up the Union flank and drive Hooker's army into a rout. As darkness falls, Jackson and his party are mistaken for Union cavalry by their own men. A volley of musket fire rings out and Jackson falls from his horse, grievously wounded. Night falls on the battlefield at Chancellorsville, filled with the groans of the wounded. Stonewall Jackson has fallen, carried from the field by his aides. One arm shattered beyond repair, a bullet lodged near his lung. Surgeons amputate the limb, uncertain of his survival. Word reaches Robert E. Lee, striking him like a physical blow. The Confederacy faces overwhelming odds as Jackson hovers between life and death. The following day, Jackson, his condition stabilized but still extremely fragile, is carefully transported from the makeshift field hospital to Guinea Station, and then by train to a nearby plantation house, where he can receive more attentive care. The house, known as Fairfield or Chandler, offers a brief respite from the harsh realities of the battlefield. Marianna Jackson, informed of her husband's wounding, rushes to his side. Her arrival brings a glimmer of hope and a sense of normalcy to the beleaguered general. He greets her with a weak smile, his voice a mere whisper, but his eyes reflecting the deep love and affection he holds for his wife. For a few days, Jackson appears to rally, his strength slowly returning, his spirits lifted by the news of the Confederate victory at Chancellorsville. He speaks of his men with pride, of his faith in God, and of his hopes for a swift end to the war. But fate, it seems, is not so kind. Unbeknownst to those who tend to him, pneumonia, a common complication of surgery in that era, has taken hold. Jackson's condition deteriorates rapidly, his fever spiking, his breathing labored. On May 10, 1863, 8 days after being wounded, Stonewall Jackson succumbs to pneumonia. He dies peacefully, his wife, Marianna, by his side. The news of Jackson's death sends shockwaves through the Confederacy. The South, still celebrating its victory at Chancellorsville, is plunged into mourning. Jackson's body lies in state in Richmond, where thousands file past his coffin, paying their respects to the fallen hero. Stonewall Jackson is laid to rest in Lexington, Virginia. Silence fell over the Confederate camp as news of Stonewall's passing spread like a chilling breeze. The victory at Chancellorsville now tasted like ashes in their mouths. Their general, their hero, their Stonewall, was gone. The men huddled together, seeking solace in shared grief. Some wept openly, while others stared blankly into the fire. The man who had seemed invincible had been brought low by fate. General Robert E. Lee received the news with stoicism. He had lost more than a general. He had lost a friend. As dawn broke, the Confederate army prepared to move, their hearts heavy with loss. The withdrawal from Chancellorsville was a somber affair. Gone was the usual swagger and confidence. The men moved with a leaden weariness. The spring air seemed to amplify their sense of loss. The wounded slowed the army's progress. Each jolt of the wagons was a grim reminder. Even victory came at a terrible price. General Stuart shouldered the responsibility with a heavy heart. His usual exuberance was tempered by the somber mood. As they crossed the Rappahannock River, a sense of foreboding settled upon them. They had lost their Stonewall, and with him, a part of their invincibility. June 1863. Emboldened by their recent victory at Chancellorsville, the Confederate Army marches north once more. General Lee, ever the gambler, believes a victory on Northern soil is the Confederacy's hope. The men, eager to avenge their fallen comrade, answer Lee's call with determination. Yet, a shadow hangs over the army, a void left by Jackson's absence. Lee aims to concentrate his forces at Gettysburg, hoping to crush the Union Army. And so the armies converge on Gettysburg, a quiet farming community about to become a battlefield. History, as we know, offers no rewind button. We can only speculate on what might have been had Stonewall Jackson been present at Gettysburg. Would his presence have tipped the scales in favor of the South? Could he have altered the course of the war? Military historians have long debated Jackson's potential impact at Gettysburg. Some believe his aggressive nature could have led to a decisive Confederate victory. Others argue he might have counseled Lee against Pickett's charge. Ultimately, we can never know what might have been. Jackson's absence left a void in the Confederate command structure. The defeat at Gettysburg marked a turning point in the war. The Confederacy, its armies battered and depleted, would never again be so close to achieving its goal of independence. The loss of Stonewall Jackson loomed large over the South's dwindling fortunes. As the war dragged on, the South's military situation grew increasingly desperate. General Lee fought brilliant defensive battles, but the tide had turned. The North, with its industrial might, tightened its grip on the Confederacy. One by one, Confederate strongholds fell: Vicksburg, Chattanooga, Atlanta. In the decades following the Civil War, the nation struggled to heal the wounds of its bloody past. Reconstruction, a period of social, political, and economic upheaval, sought to rebuild the South and integrate freed slaves into American society. As the nation grappled with the legacy of slavery and the meaning of freedom, Stonewall Jackson's image took on a complex and often contradictory life of its own. To some, particularly in the South, he remained a hero, a symbol of Southern valor, military genius, and the lost cause mythology that sought to romanticize the Confederacy and downplay the horrors of slavery. Others viewed Jackson as a tragic figure, a brilliant military mind whose talents were wasted in defense of a cause that was morally bankrupt. His legacy, like that of the Confederacy itself, became a subject of debate and reinterpretation, a mirror reflecting the evolving understanding of the war and its consequences. Today, Stonewall Jackson's legacy continues to fascinate and challenge us. His story reminds us of the complexities of history, the enduring power of myth, and the importance of engaging with the past in all its messy, contradictory glory.